So is legal going to present for Kootenai?
We don't have legal presence.
No?
It's planning staff is here, and then 2 council members and the mayor, whom I guess you want them to go ahead and introduce
No.
themselves.
Yeah, well, everyone will introduce, but I
Okay.
thought, I wasn't sure if we were going to have
Go on
legal
the
presence.
record.
All right. All right, it is 8:30 and we're here for a workshop with Kootenai County regarding their area of impact. With that, we'll turn it over to planning first. Director Gabel.
Good morning. So City of Kootenai reached out and wanted to have a workshop with the board before they submitted a revised area of impact proposal. So just for context, we had a proposal earlier this year. We held a hearing a couple months ago. I think it was remanded along with several other cities due to kind of the nature, well, the board's interpretation and analysis of state statute that was changed last year. So given that, that's why we're here today. I haven't received anything to pass on to the board. This is an opportunity to have just a conversation dialogue with the city officials.
Sounds good. Thank you. All right, who wants to go first?
Claire Marley, for the record, with the city contract thing.
So we'll need you to come to the microphone.
Or pass it.
Or if you guys don't want to move, you can just grab that microphone and pass it down the line.
Claire Marley again for the record, and I did bring some handouts real quick.
Okay.
For context.
Thank you. And then can we give one to our clerk?
Oh, sorry, you bet.
Oh, there we go.
Got it. And if I could ask everyone to introduce themselves too, so you
Sure.
know who you're speaking with.
And Claire, if you want, you can have a seat there. You can go to that podium.
So I'm Councilman Schrock.
Tess Vogel, I'm planner for the city.
Mara, City of Kootenai.
Councilman Ferris, City of Kootenai.
City Clerk, City of Kootenai.
I think you guys know me. Jacob Bell, planning director. Behind me is Dylan, who's our hearing coordinator.
All right, sounds good. We've seen him a couple times, I think. All right, thank you, Claire.
Like, so Chair, I was hoping this could be somewhat informal, so if we need to pass the mic around, we can.
Okay.
But our objective today is, we feel like we're in the middle of a crossroads between deciding what the board wants and what the city itself wants. So we spent a little bit of time remapping based on our last hearing with the board on June the 6th. And city felt that they needed to look at some things further with respect to the criteria that is allowed to be considered in addition to just the likely to be annexed within 5 years. So that's part of our discussion today, is to see whether or not the board has an interest or an inclination to also consider some other factors. So I put the area of impact state code criteria on the first page of your handout. The second page is the map that in the lower right corner is listed as August 6, 2025. That's the second revision map that we looked at with City Council. And then the original one that was denied by the board, which is the last map in that little packet that I gave you. And within those two maps, the very last one, obviously we did have some issues with being able to show that those are likely to be annexed, that they were in service areas, et cetera. But as we looked back at our second map, we wanted to see whether there is any consideration that we could give to some very specific things that the city pays for and connects with, which are part of the criteria of the state code. And that is that we have in the middle of our city a very large, one of the largest elementary schools. And the city has paid and is paying to connect our city to other parts that are not even in the city. For example, Ponder Point, for which the city paid to have the rapid flashing beacon so that folks who cross, kids who cross that highway, a very busy highway, have that beacon to help, oncoming motorists see those kids crossing, and that was paid for by the city. We now have underway, as you go through town, you'll see that Railroad Avenue is being improved. And part of that includes a pathway that goes along from that Rapid Beacon entrance all the way through to reach the school system, as well as an update that will allow kids on Second Avenue, Mayor, is that correct, to use the sidewalk, even if they're coming from Providence, which obviously is not in the city, as well as an update to McGee Road, which, again, the city paid for that, city tax money as well as grant money. So we feel strongly that there are connectors to this community that are given by the city that reach farther than outside of the city itself. The other issue that we wanted to bring attention to, and you might have seen this or heard this from other cities, is we feel that this still is an impact area. Even though it's not strictly annexation, it's also impact. And we feel we're missing that chance to be able to continue to have a role or a comment effort in things that happen in the midst or at the edges of our community. So those are the factors that we wanted to be able to look at today. So the two council members may want to add some comments or at least get some conversation going with the board on how you feel we can land. And we did speak with our city attorney about this meeting. He said it's legislative, meaning that it's not quasi-judicial. We're free to have this exchange because we're in a legislative setting.
If I could comment, I know one of the things that on the Kootenai annexation that was a bit of a sticking point was the subsection B. So as we go through council persons giving comments, one of the things that all of the comments that you gave, I think, are reasonable and recognized by the county, but the subsection that says an area of impact shall not exceed the areas that are very likely to be annexed to the city within the next 5 years. And that was very specific to what the decision was on part of the county. It wasn't just that you guys are planning for future beyond 5 years, because reasonably the city would have to do that. But when it comes to what area we're supposed to consider, it says shall not. And that we were in our original discussion focused on what does the statute give us authority to do, not consideration. And so I can consider from my perspective, I can consider all of the other points, but I shall not exceed unless it's very likely. And that's where I think the sticking point of your map is the definition of shall requires me to adhere to something different than may not exceed. And so that's, I think, probably when we're having the dialogue that we're stuck on is I personally, as a commissioner, don't see my flexibility outside of that section to say, because you guys are considering growth beyond 5 years and how you'll connect beyond the 5 years, that I can weigh that differently than what the statute tells me to weigh it. And I think that's where my point was on their particular one. Commissioner Domke?
I agree with that. What I'd like to add, however, is I think there's a way we could possibly work beyond the area of impact guidance when it comes to just communication and coordination, right? We're not bound only by the area of impact statute when it comes to how we coordinate as entities. And so I'm really welcoming the idea to figure out if there's a process we could use to better coordinate, to get your input and feedback when projects are being proposed outside of the area of impact, but still within close proximity to the city. So I'm not in any way opposed to that. I think that'd be a really healthy and beneficial thing to do. But I agree that we, the county board, I believe, are confined by what the statute is telling us to look at, and I don't want to go outside of those parameters that the statute has given us. So I think having a boundary that we can reasonably argue is logical to say could possibly fit within the likely criteria for the area of impact. I'm good with that. But then if you guys want to help talk to us about how we could define a communication methodology or open channel there for when you'd be interested. And obviously, we don't want it to become too administratively burdensome, but I think having some sort of regular communication when it comes to areas of what I'll call overlap beyond the AOI, but that could still have something to think about with more long-term planning from the city's perspective. I think getting additional input is always beneficial when we have files come before us.
I think that I equally recognize the position of the city, because you can't rely on how the board will interpret that input that you give, because it's up to the board that's sitting to say we're going to thoughtfully consider and use that document as the board makes a decision, as board changes. And I think that's where I completely understand wanting it to be clearly defined as an area of impact so that there's something that you can rely on. But when I look at the statute, I don't have the flexibility to give you anything beyond what's likely to be annexed. But I can say, in a way, as a commissioner, when I see the cities and different organizations writing a comment, I weigh those significantly of, hey, the city is saying we need to consider this, regardless of whether it's in that impact or not, because you guys are equally bound to not overburden the area. But that doesn't mean we know that your plan has to go beyond 5 years of what your growth looks like, especially when you look at connectivity of water and your transportation and schools. It's just, I think what you guys are exposing is that there's a desperate need to improve communication between the two, such that we are not negatively impacting the growth of the city and the future plans that are beyond our ability to help you constrain and control. And that comes from the quality of your county commissioners, not me saying to overstep shall not exceed. I think that you guys, I think when you look at the map that you guys gave, I think it actually gives us very clear lines of what your concerning areas are. And I think that that's important. I think you guys will always get that comment from the board, from the county. I mean, in terms of, this is a growth, what's your comment? And your city is one of those ones that always writes that comment in there. You guys always give a comment, which is really good. And I noticed that Kootenai always gives a comment. And you're very clear on this is, we're not impacted by this. But I think that our planning department recognizing the importance of this map that you have drawn is critical. I'd say to your council, do you guys have an argument that says that from what was provided that there is a change based on likely to be annexed in the next 5 years? Or is it only the other issues within here that you guys are wanting consideration for? And yeah, anybody have it's likely to be annexed based on the map? And you can snatch that microphone and then have one on each side.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just state your name for the record, please.
For the record, Daniel Schock, Councilman. There's a couple things I wanted to point out. In the upper corner here is the Ponderay Sewer Districts. So I think that's why we kind of add them in. As soon as we get to that property, that's where they have their holding ponds. So that property was never getting smaller. That's, I think, why we went that far up there. And then listening to the last YouTube, I was watching those, where this came before, was water and sewer. So sewer's already up there, but water, we have Odin Bay District. Now, granted, they're at capacity, but they said they can expand. I was talking to their president today. So we could get water up there if the developer helped pay for the infrastructure. So that's one thing there.
So within the next 5 years, do you anticipate annexation of that area?
Forced annexation, no. No. But if a developer came to us, I don't see those. They're not that much parcels to be asking annexed in. Providence, if they hadn't gotten water, they would have been annexed into the city. Jeffrey's Way is almost in the same boat. We're kind of getting boxed in with these smaller properties with the water being allowed outside of our boundaries. But if, I could see that we could get there to, within this, what we've mapped out.
I can see that you could achieve it, there's not a plan to do it. Let me ask you a question on the water. Because this came up with Mayor Grimm in terms of serving outside of the boundaries. Is there an open communication with the mayor of Sandpoint in terms of the will serve? Because this, not going down this file, but this was an issue that came up with Providence and a comment that was made of why it should be pulled into the city versus being on the outskirts of it. Is there a conversation that you guys are having to address the water? Because in part of the problem is because they get the will serve letter outside of your boundary, then it makes it work. And that's not the county, that it comes to the city.
And Mayor probably has had a more recent conversation, Claire Marley, for the record, so I'll let her speak first.
I had, a
State
while
your name.
before Mayor Grimm was mayor, I did have a conversation with the previous mayor, Shaw, and the pond array was there, I was there, and I think there was a representative from, I guess, from Sandpoint who was doing like a water survey or something. And it was before this all broke loose with all the building and everything. And I said, you got to do something about your water because you can't handle everything. And I said, you need to make a moratorium. And then when Providence came up, I did not want them to give them water unless they annexed in. And they were adamant about not annexing, but I didn't want them to have the water because we don't have any say-so. And that was hard. And that is going to be a huge impact on us. And they want a road coming through, and they'll be using that, and we won't get any tax money on that. So that was not a good thing for us.
When was the last time you got to speak with Mayor Grimm? Because I had a meeting with him I think it was about 2 weeks ago, and one of our conversations was we need to open the communications through the county and the cities to address the impact that our individual decisions that we might be in control over impact the people around us. And one of them was addressing water, because they do have some water constraints that they're starting to recognize. And I believe they found a resolution from a couple of years ago regarding not pulling their water from outside of their boundary of required, because they have to make sure that they're able to service what they're required to service and not necessarily going outside, such that the pulling in of into the area of impact would allow the revenue to generate to help build the system up. So have we spoken with him
I have not. I mean, I see him in church on Sunday, that's about it. But no, he's never reached out to me, and I've tried to make an appointment to talk to him, but he's just
Can we
busy.
work on that? Because
Sure.
that's one of our changes is I will work with, because I'm in contact with Mayor Grimm, and one of the things is we're trying to do a collaborative discussion amongst everybody who's making decisions. And I think this is a perfect example of a meeting of the minds on how they can positively impact, because your bigger impact isn't the area of impact. It really is the city of Sandpoint is pulling a little bit apart in a way that you end up with the negative of you have to absorb the cost associated with the growth, but you don't get any of the money that comes with it. You just come with the obligation, similar to kind of the county.
Yes.
We have the obligation to provide the services, but we're not getting the increased revenue that comes to it. And I think if there was a conversation with the municipalities that were impacted by that, then that would be a better option and have more consistency throughout growth, because the city of Sandpoint is also developing. They have their development impacts you in large part greater than what the county is doing. And they are in more control of the negative thing, negative for you, positive for the developer piece that's impacting you that you have to absorb. And so I think we have to increase that communication with Mayor Grimm so that he hears it and that we have a plan, because communicating with the county is what we can do. But your bigger problem really rests with the city of Sandpoint, and really it does come down to the water, which they're starting to recognize a water issue at the city level.
Yeah, they should. Because we're not a city with lots of businesses. We are mainly residential.
Okay.
with a few smaller businesses, so, and our school.
What's your email? Your mayor email.
Mayor, was it Mayor Dot Lewis? I forgot. I
You
used the
forgot?
other one. Mayor Lewis dot Ola.
send it. Okay, email it to me, and then I will copy Mayor Grimm,
Okay.
and then we'll get that conversation going on how to address the impact, especially the water outside of their district. Because I have a suspicion that they're going to stop doing that at that rate right now, because they're also looking at addressing their own water and then their own treatment. And I think that requires them to do some adjustments. And their obligation then is to adjust what's outside of their footprint versus what they're doing on the inside. And I think that that might help the city of Kootenai and Ponderay address those concerns. Thank you, Tess.
They have lots of building going on.
They do.
So do you guys have any data you can share that shows that there are any parcels that are currently being considered for annexation?
Yes, we have at least one. And Stephen, do you want to cover any there, or do you want me to?
Claire, can you pass it to Stephen?
Yeah, I was going to say, first, I wanted to speak. I didn't want to.
We've got one on each side.
Yeah, last night at our council meeting, we were looking at Jeffrey Street. And so my question is, you asked to communicate more on what we want to annex, or what we're seeing, like where our next steps would be. What would that communication look like? Is there a template? You want a paragraph? How do we start that conversation with you?
Just an email to the planning and the board would be great, just for our awareness, yeah.
And then could we get some?
Looking at the planning director, I don't believe we have a specific format, so just an email communication is great.
And if you have, and sometimes people like to, so I know someone sends me a note, I respond, thank you that I received it. You
Okay.
can send it to the planning department and the BOCC staff. That way, all three commissioners, BOCC staff email goes to the staff, but all three commissioners will receive a
Okay.
copy of that. And then it puts the whole board on notice that this is where Kootenai is going. And as the board, regardless of who's up here, receives that communication when we're looking at files, it reminds us of, wait, Kootenai said this is where they're moving, let me make sure I mean, we're supposed to all read those
Gotcha.
comments, but it adds that extra layer of open communication between the two.
And right now, that's totally, completely missing. Is it
Yep,
my
just-
understanding? Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
I mean, other than when you guys, because of the current area of impact, right, get official notice of a file. I mean, that's the only method right now. I think that it's just, that's based on statutory noticing. So we're saying, hey, let's try to open up the channels of communication beyond statutory noticing and just communicate more.
Okay. Thank you.
And I think also, from a council perspective, when you guys have things that are coming up and you want the county to be aware of, there's no reason not to say, hey, we've got this project going on. Can someone from the county come to our meeting? And I'll use Mayor Connolly in Priest River as an example. They've got a huge project going on. And his communication is, I'll let you know when it's on my agenda so that you guys can hear what we're doing down here, because that's part of giving that kind of, I know it's another meeting, but it gives us an opportunity to see what's happening that we otherwise might not, because actually of the three of us, I don't think anybody lives in Sandpoint area. And so it's somebody stay behind and watch this meeting, or come and hear this, we've got a speaker. I think that that's also something that you guys can absolutely say, I want a commissioner to hear what we're doing, because one of the things that we do differently is you'll hear, we give a report out of, these are the issues and the concerns that have been brought forward to the county, and we're telling the whole county that at our Tuesday meeting, which also provides some awareness and visibility for an issue that comes forward, which that has been actually very beneficial to the community as a whole. And so if I say, I'm getting concerns from Kootenai about water availability, then that's the whole county hearing that on Tuesday, not just me as a commissioner. And I think we should utilize that. The other thing is doing conversations of, if you want the whole county to know what's happening and the impact and the development, calling the county and say, how can you guys help us? This is what, we have an issue. Some people call me and say, I want to do a commissioner chat, I have an issue, and I just need a video that can be spread across the internet that allows people to say, this is our plan right now of what we're doing. So I think that more communication and collaboration can help with that strain. Do you have, you mentioned a specific street. Is there a street that you're expecting to be annexed in that is not, that we didn't consider, or is it?
It's Claire Marley. It is in both of the maps. It's called Hollyford subdivision, and it's on Jeffrey Drive, directly north of the city limits. And there is an interest in that annexation, at least at this point, may be voluntary, but we're exploring that. So we know that's perhaps a very likely.
Okay.
I have a direct question to the Board of Commissioners. Last night, as we talked over what we wanted to do next with the AOI, we recognized that we spent $1,000 in noticing for this first go-around, and the council is not wanting to do that again. So is the directive of the board is that you will only consider very likely and all other criteria will be ignored, not ignored, but can't be weighed in? Because I think all of our cities feel like this legislation really hurt all of the cities because we lost our abilities to comment. So the first question to the board is this going to be so narrow that we will only consider that? And if that's the case, I think that's where they need to go next. Also, the second thought that you had was, is there another way to tackle this issue of being able to comment? And I don't think we're precluded from including in your ordinance the ability to provide notification. It may be as wide as within our comprehensive plan area of city impact, which we're going to keep that. We don't have to get rid of that. That could be something that the county, right now you send out notice to all of us for everything, and that gives us some weight in being able to comment. And could that possibly be included in this area of city impact or area of impact ordinance, but at a different weight than the actual impact area? Could that be considered?
I think my first comment on your first section is my issue with the ordinance is it uses a term that I don't have the authority as a commissioner to to change. It specifically tells me, in addition to the criteria set forth in paragraph A of this subsection, an area of impact shall not exceed the areas that are very likely to be annexed to the city within the next 5 years. Except as otherwise provided in this paragraph, an area of impact shall not extend more than 2 miles from existing city limits. I am being directed I can't bypass that sentence. And so in terms of, do I reasonably believe that you could convince me that I can? My answer is no, because it says shall, it doesn't say may. And I think that in order to tackle that word, that's going to Legislative District 1 and saying that word is too restrictive and you should consider the impacts. And with that, I am more than willing to copy you on all of your Legislative District 1 reps. You're also in an election year where you have people running for office, and ask them to carry the water down to the state to address the word shall in that sentence. Because I, like you, am bound by the way that's written. So that would be my answer there. In terms of the weight given, I think that all comments are given weight. There's not a severity level of weight within the code. It is the interpretation and the strength of argument of the commissioner that argues the point that they feel is significant once they receive that. And I think the way I would approach that is the objective, verifiable, non-emotional, code-focused, ordinance-focused information, not the appeal to emotion argument that oftentimes comes with planning of we don't want it to grow versus this is the negative impact that will come, especially if you had an example of here's where we're impacted, this is how we're impacted. I think that evidence-based responses, for me as a commissioner, I am very strong on show me how your argument is strengthened objectively, not just the words. And I'll give an example of the school district writes the same similar canned answer. It doesn't mean that what they're saying isn't true. The impact of growth negatively impacts the school, and we know how they get money. But you're telling me the same thing without anything of substance. But if you told me when you increase this development by this number of people, I can assume this number of kids, and this is where I'd be, and this is the number of outbuildings I would need, and this is how I'm impacted, and showed me data, then I have something to give an argument when I have to do my review of it. But if you just end your statement that says, so can you encourage them to give me a donation? I can't do anything with that. So understanding how your commissioners can make a decision and what we rely on, I think is increasing that communication, because I can't compel a donation to a school, but I can absolutely say, well, they've provided me with some objective information on how this will negatively impact it, and then tie me back to the rule that tells me I have to pay attention to that aspect and impact. That's oftentimes what we don't get as the board. And so as a commissioner, I look for that to make the decision, because every decision I make, there's a winner and there's a loser. And I have to be able to stand on the process, and my process is fact-based minus the appeal to emotion, minus the generic terminology about the issue. That's how my votes are pretty easy, because if it's written and it's in the code and you give the data, that's where my votes go, because that's what I can stand on, and that's how I justify decision-making. I think that more communication helps us understand that. I think that your growth and some of your examples, you guys actually have quite a bit of data of the impact of the growth of some of the decisions that the county has actually made, of things that are on the outskirts of Kootenai, and then the impacts that decisions that the city have made, that you could bring forward non-canned letters. And you guys, your letter on Providence was a very good letter. You did a really good job on that letter, objectively writing it. And that is, I think, what the boards need to see, but it's also what the community needs to see, because you got community that are following planning and zoning and building, and they're ready and willing to write comments on the development, the growth, and the preservation of the area, and giving them a very good letter when they go through, because they get to see what's there. They'll pull it out and they'll say, look, this is what the mayor said. You guys aren't considering that.
I think,
Yes.
Louis, I think there's a possibility too, if we start fairly soon in approaching the people that are moving into Providence and telling them that we would like to annex them. Kids are going to go to our school. We can make it easier for them to annex the school. We've already done like an access road on Highway 200 there for them to get in and out, and possibly maybe eventually a signal there. So, that's another beginning.
And that's a good workshop to do, of let's start advertising from the city to that development of what are the benefits of annexation. And, when you're doing that compare contrast, it's people are, well, I don't want to have to pay the city fees, but what do you get for those fees, and why do those fees benefit you in terms of the development and maintaining the development that you got in it, the condition before is no longer what you want to support? Because eventually, just like in that hearing it was stated, eventually it's going to get annexed in.
I think they will eventually, yeah. And who knows, maybe they do want to come in. And I know, just because the builder didn't want to build it.
You did have people that wanted to come into it, and
Yes.
maybe that's part of the conversation, is how do you work with that development to show the pros and the cons, and how do you advertise what are the pros of being inside versus on the outside? If I remember in that hearing, that developer actually had the assumption that once it was all done, they would likely be in anyhow. It's just they didn't want to have to build to the standard of
Exactly.
the city.
Yes, because he had problems years ago, and it was sad because he built some nice houses, and but he just had a hard time. But I think, we take care of their streets, we'll do their snow plowing, and it would be beneficial to them.
Claire Marley, for the record, one other thing that the city of Kootenai has that Providence may want is an access point through the city. So would it be wrong for the city to include Providence as a very likely? Would that be acceptable to the board?
With within the next 5 years?
Yes.
I don't think that that's an unreasonable one.
Councilman Schock, for the record, so we can try to narrow this down, what areas on our map, if you don't mind, telling me that concern you? So we can maybe focus on those areas, find this, try to whittle this down. Where do we agree? Where do we disagree? And then we can figure out where we can move forward through.
So for me, it's kind of the reverse question. I need justification to tell me that it is reasonable to believe that it's likely to happen in the next 5 years. So there needs to be some evidence to say that you have some data that would tell us that's reasonable to include. So it's not that I'm looking at any one area and saying, well, that's unreasonable. To me, the whole thing is I can't support it unless I have data that tells me it's reasonable per statute. And I think one of the kind of gray areas in my mind, and I don't know if the planning director has any input from himself or from legal, but when it talks about in the state code where there's municipal or public sewer and water, that gets a little odd because if it's a separate taxing district as compared to a public service being provided directly by the city, I really think the intent of the code is that the city is the one providing the public service, not a separate taxing district. So I would shy away from trying to use a separate taxing district as justification because they're their own entity. And so you guys don't have direct control over those decisions. And so it's really, I think, challenging to try to make an argument from that perspective. I don't know if you have any different thoughts on that, Director, but.
I think I agree with you, Commissioner Domke, that I think that the intent here, or the assumption when they're writing this statute is that these services are provided by the city, but I don't know that for certain, so.
It doesn't spell it out plainly.
No, it doesn't.
But in the context of what the area of impact is supposed to be, we're starting to cross jurisdictional boundaries, right? If we get into separate taxing districts that have their own decision-making bodies, that the city itself doesn't have the ability to control those outcomes. You can influence them, you can have conversations, but you can't actually make the decision yourselves. So I
haven't gotten legal's weigh in on that
Okay.
analysis either, so to answer that question.
I actually think even the city sees it the same way, because if not, but for the fact that they don't have control, they would positively impact their own area of impact by way of, we're not giving it to you unless you pull into it. And so I think that confirms what the intent of that is, because they wouldn't have that as an issue.
So for me, I would disregard the separate water and sewer districts and just look at what areas do you think you're likely to annex because of either current discussions or prior feedback and information you've received. And if you guys can just share that with us, it sounds like at this point there's two that you clearly identified. If you have information for any other areas beyond that, then I would share that with the proposed boundary and have that be that one. But without that type of information, I'll be reluctant to agree to a boundary line that goes beyond those areas. Just because, again, unfortunately, of how restrictive the current state code is written. And I concur that it probably is more restrictive than it should have been. So I would lobby legislators to modify that in the upcoming session. But until they do, I do feel bound to follow it.
And I think the two that you've mentioned were in your original map drawing. I think really based on what you guys have presented, it's really that you're going to shrink your map from how large it was to make sure that you still include those two, that you can say, well, within the next 5 years, we do anticipate this area to be annexed, but you really are just reducing your map unless you guys identify that within 5 years, well, we can reasonably argue this might actually, not that it has the ability to grow this section, but within the next 5 years, because we have to look at the area of impact and, you have another go round of looking at it, and that, your section where you're saying up in the top corner, might be more reasonable. And your answer is, well, within the last 5 years, we were approached by developers wanting to develop that area, and therefore we think it would be annexed in based on the interest that we're getting in planning. And I think that also can be your objective data to show your growth. But I think your overall map is really going to shrink because a lot of your growth area was where you were saying, we're servicing in some way and including it, but we're not actually growing in that direction per that particular subsection of the statute.
So Claire, Marley, just real quick, we are, in the cities we represent, providing comment to our legislators now. So the one you just got from Dover has that in it with some strong language about how this really didn't give us an impact area any longer. So we are doing that. And then as far as the going forward, I think we're going to take your advice and recognizing that the city still has the ability to voluntarily obtain annexation, even if it's not in the area of impact. State law still allows that.
Mayor Lewis, unless the, up on North Main, going towards, I guess it would be Poroth Road, those are all ranches up there. And unless they were to start wanting to subdivide, that would be an area that we could consider possibly annexation also. But as it is now, I'm sure they want to stay the way they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything further?
Claire, Marley, one quick question. When we brought the map to you and we had the discussion over that overlap with Pend Oreille, you excluded that area from Pend Oreille's and left unsettled whether or not Kootenai should include it in theirs. We did conduct a survey with this group about 4 months ago, I'm going to guess.
The group of property owners?
Of these property owners here.
Sorry,
And
I just
they,
wanted to clarify that.
sorry. And so their answers were generally they'd rather stay in the county, but if they had a choice, they'd rather be in the city of Kootenai. So we would like to include that triangle.
I think that just comes back to, for me, is there a plan in place that you see carrying forward in the next 5 years for that annexation, given that feedback? Is that something you guys are going to try to force?
Well, there could be.
Yeah, there's a
I think there's a
likelihood.
possibility, but yes, is it very likely that there's going to be forced annexation of those parcels?
We're aware
Here, hearing, you had people that came that were vocal that they did not want to be annexed in.
into Pend Oreille.
Yeah, so what is your current plan?
We have some development that's not yet public, that's proposing something in the city. Because they haven't submitted an application yet, I can't comment on that, so it could affect these properties.
Okay. And so you feel in the next 5 years that triangle is on a more probable than not likely based, and that they're, so let me ask you, if you guys polled them and they told you that they were wanting to do it, are you going to get a willful submission pull into the city?
A willful?
Are they going to just choose to do it then?
I think it's dependent on what comes from this property development near them.
Okay.
And that's where, in my mind, if you're aware of a project that's in the initial planning phase, that's not, in my mind, that's not something that's completely speculative. You actually have data, you have somebody who's shown an interest in development. That's a reasonable assumption to say because somebody is pursuing the idea of development versus it might be developed someday because it's a good piece of land. To me, that's just way too speculative to base a judgment decision on in this type of situation. But if you have an actual interested party let me just put it this way. If you have open communication with somebody who's pursuing the idea of development, to me, that would become a reasonable basis to present.
And in order to preserve what you're not able to say, there's always the option of addressing an executive session so that you can explain what you're talking about to the Board of Commissioners to make sure that you're giving enough convincing data that we can make an objective decision on what you're presenting.
Okay.
Okay.
But again, that's what's just, if you can come forward with evidence for each area that you're asking to expand into for the area of impact, then we can check the boxes in my mind to say, yes, there's actual data driving this request instead of it just being speculative.
And then I think also for the school aspect, where they're on the outside, but you need them to be inside of, is it all whether or not someone agrees, or what can the city do to address the fact that you're getting impacted by someone on the outside that's not paying on the inside of the city limits, and what is the city's plan? Or are you totally dependent on, for example, Providence agreeing to come into that boundary, or what are your options? And that's also something that can be discussed in an executive session with the board of, this is why we need to do that. It's kind of like that dreaded, as we go into a planning thing, eminent domain of, what is your ripcord on, you're impacting the city, but you want the benefit of not paying, but we are so the city is paying for other people that aren't paying into it. So what are the abilities of the city to compel someone to have to come into your fold because of the impact? And what does that plan look like on the city, instead of just saying, they said they'd agree to, we need them to, but how do you make them have to? So that we say, well, we don't need to go that route. It's in the area of impact, and then address it. Because in part, the area of impact does help if the argument is there. Does that make, what are your options? Or does everyone have to just say yes? So,
Because Ponderay elementary kids, they all come to our school. So that's, we give that to them.
yeah.
Did I hear you say that you have services going to Ponder Point now, or not?
Claire Marley, we don't have city services, but we've extended city monies to help with the crossing safety into Ponder Point.
And the residents came to us and asked them, and we said, we will help you get that, and we did. So.
Is there an expectation was there an exchange of ideas that said, you're coming to the city for assistance of money from city residents, come into the city to have services?
Claire Marley, yes, there was. There was going to be an equal share, but the equal share became all city, because once the beacon went up, no one came forward to finish payment on that, so it was all on City of Kootenai.
They never came through with their half. So we felt it was okay, we did it, so.
Okay. All right. Anything further?
Jim, anything else?
Commissioner Corn?
So this area up here you said was Ponderay Sewer? Is that this large lot here?
Yeah.
Have you discussed with them whether or not they would like to be annexed or not? What's their opinion on that?
I haven't talked to them.
It just seems kind of odd to me that another city would have infrastructure inside of a different city.
Tess Vogel. Normally, I worked for sewer districts and water districts. That usually has no bearing on them. They're a taxing district, so they work separately and differently, obviously, than any private property. So it doesn't matter if they're sitting within a city or not and who they serve. For example, the City of Hope is served by Elsport Bay Sewer District. That's sitting on a county property. That doesn't sit on a city property. It goes into portions of East Hope, portions of the county out there. It doesn't matter to them. They don't need to be in a city specifically, even if that's the city actual service. It doesn't have to be within it. And so it doesn't have to be in Ponderay's on there.
And I understand that. I think my concern, if I was sitting on that board, if there's a Ponderay Sewer Board, is that I may not want to have my city's infrastructure within a different city that could be directed to go one way or the other with their property or their parcel.
I think that happens in our county also, when you go down to southwest Bonner County, you've got a portion of Spirit Lake Bonner and Spirit Lake Kootenai, and the sewer, that has been an argument for
I think that there
decades.
may be a misunderstanding, though, that if I understand correctly, isn't this the Kootenai Ponderay Sewer District that we're talking about? So they're just an independent taxing entity that is providing services across multiple municipalities. So they So it's not,
It's not strictly
it's not
Pend Oreille's.
Pend Oreille's
No.
municipal system, it's a separate taxing district. I was just looking at the map, Commissioner, and they go, I wasn't aware of their boundaries before, but their boundaries go all the way to Sand Creek,
Okay.
to the west, and then go all the way halfway across Sunnyside on that peninsula. So they're spanning like three different,
They're separate then and different from the cities. Like the cities don't own any portion of that, that I'm aware of, any portion of that sewer district. So it's a separate entity altogether.
Gotcha.
And I think the Southwest Bonner County situation is a good example of how they toggle two different counties and cities, and it's coming down to a document from,
yeah, I wouldn't want the situation you were talking about.
Yeah, it
but
just
this is a
seemed
little
odd
different.
that
Yeah.
my city's municipality, my infrastructure is going to be controlled somewhat by another city, and if there's a rivalry for one reason or another,
Yeah.
how does that impact?
And that's why it gets so confusing, because we have these independent taxing districts, but then we also have City of Sandpoint's water system that crosses boundaries, and so that's where it gets really challenging. I have to pull up the maps to figure out where things are, because there's so much overlap.
Years ago, evidently, part of that, after talking with so many old residents that lived in the area for years, it used to be a softball field up there where several girls would play softball or baseball and everything. I don't know when they kind of fenced it off and everything, but it's kind of, and history is really interesting up there about all the little things that happened, and when it was just the lumber people were there. It's quite interesting to hear what happened and how it all changed. And a lot of the stuff we don't know. We rely on some of the older residents to give us insight on what was what. So that was that.
And just one last clarifying question to kind of piggyback on what Commissioner Corn asked earlier about Ponder Point. Does the city have any infrastructure that crosses the highway into Ponder Point?
Claire Marley, for the record, we don't. There's an oddity that our city limits cross over into Ponder Point. You can see the railroad tracks.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, for some reason, there are some county permits that are issued in the city of Kootenai for buildings on property that are in the city of Kootenai. So that's something we've never talked about. But if you look at the aerial, you'll see there are garages and ADUs, and they're actually in the city of Kootenai, not in Bonner County.
Railroad right away.
And the railroad right away, right. Yeah, that too.
Well, federal trumps, that's interesting.
Yeah, you can see it on the aerials.
Okay.
Thank you for your time, Board of Commissioners.
Good conversation, thank you.
when are your council meetings?
We meet October 7th.
October 7th? Okay, all right. Is there, first, everybody packs it in on Tuesday. What time? Oh, I don't know why I was thinking in the morning, 6:30 a.m. All right. Anything further, board? All right, it is 9:22 and this workshop is adjourned. Thank you. Thank you. Go grab all my homework.
Getting ready for other things, but we were curious about that.